You cannot do this to me. Donovan Pierce's voice cracked on the last word. Nobody at the table moved. Nobody looked at him. They were all looking at the door. She walked in wearing an all-black blazer, natural hair pulled back clean, one folder held against her side. 33 years old. Unhurried. She didn't acknowledge the lawyers or the view or the man standing at the window with his hands flat on the mahogany surface. She walked directly to the empty seat at the head of the table, set the folder down, and looked at Donovan Pierce. You should have considered this possibility, she said, before you fire me on my wedding day. Donovan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The board chair called the meeting to order. The champagne flute hit the marble floor and shattered. Nobody picked it up. A phone lit up in a dark room. 9 words that ended 6 years in a single message. A lone officer slid the folder back across the desk without opening it. An apartment sat quiet and half unpacked for months. A man in a charcoal suit stood behind glass, watching people scatter beneath him. Still in control, still untouchable, or so he believed. A woman sat alone at a folding table at 4 a.m. with nothing but a notebook and a single lamp, and she wrote. A stock chart dropped, then dropped faster. And on the morning it finally hit the floor, a key card was placed on a lobby desk, an elevator opened, and a man who thought he had buried her walked out of the building she now owned. He fired her in a single message on the morning of her wedding. 5 years later, she owned everything he built. If you are someone who has ever been written off by exactly the wrong person at exactly the wrong moment, subscribe to Echotales by Ken right now, because this story does not peak early. It gets sharper and it gets colder with every single chapter. Subscribe before this one ends. 5 years earlier, the bridal suite at the Palmer House smelled like gardenias and dry shampoo. Bridesmaids moved in choreographed chaos between the rooms. An R&B playlist drifted from a Bluetooth speaker on the bathroom counter. The dress, ivory, clean lines, the kind of dress that knows it doesn't need to try too hard, hung from the wardrobe door like the period at the end of a very long sentence. Alex Fontaine had been at Crestline Capital for 6 years. She had arrived at 22 with a Northwestern business degree and the specific kind of ambition that doesn't announce itself in rooms. She spent her first 2 years learning the difference between how Crestline presented itself publicly and how it actually worked. By 25, she was leading due diligence on mid-market acquisitions. By 27, she was director strategy, youngest in company history, the only black woman in senior leadership, reporting directly to the founder, reporting directly to Donovan Pierce. Donovan was 71. He had made his first $100 million before 40 and had never once reconsidered whether the rules applying to other people applied to him. Sharp, relentless, magnetic in the way men are magnetic when they have never been told no often enough to develop real character. For 6 years, she had been exactly what he needed. Precise enough to anticipate him, composed enough never to require him to slow down. She had just clipped her second earring when the phone buzzed on the vanity. Message from Crestline's chief people officer. Subject, action required, confidential. She tapped the attachment without thinking. 1 page, company letterhead, her name at the top, notice of termination, effective immediately, strategic realignment of senior leadership structure, effective today. She read it once, then again, then a third time. The playlist was still going. Her bridesmaids were arguing in the next room about whose heels were whose. Outside the window, Chicago was cold and bright and completely unmoved. She set the phone face down on the vanity, picked up her lipstick, finished getting dressed. She got married 90 minutes later. She told no one. Theo found out 5 days after they came home. They had kept the honeymoon short, 4 nights in Montego Bay, because she told him she had obligations back in Chicago the following week. The obligations no longer existed. She hadn't mentioned this. They were eating dinner when she finally said it. Quietly, plainly, Theo set his fork down. 5 days, he said. You've known for 5 days. I didn't want it to become the story of our wedding. Alex, I'm handling it. You're not handling it. You just didn't tell me. That was the first crack. Small enough that both of them could still have passed it. What Theo didn't know was that the termination wasn't clean. Donovan had moved before she finished reading the document. By day 3, she had reached out to 4 firms that had been quietly recruiting her for over a year. All 4 went silent within 48 hours. Not slow, silent. The kind that only happens when someone with real reach has made a specific and deliberate request. By the end of week 2, 19 applications had gone out. 2 automated responses came back. Nothing else. Then a former colleague. Someone who had left Crestline 2 years earlier under circumstances nobody ever fully explained. Call from a number she didn't recognize. Donovan made calls. He said, "Stay low. Let people forget for a while." She thanked him. Ended the call. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after that. 6 years. The weekends she hadn't taken. The deals she had pulled back from the edge. The board presentation 18 months ago where a single recommendation she made had positioned Crestline ahead of market correction that cost their 3 closest competitors a combined $200 million. $200 million. One message, routed through the chief people officer. On the morning of her wedding, she opened her laptop. New document. 3 columns. What she knew, what she could prove, what she intended to build. And here is what nobody understood at that point. Not Theo, not the 4 firms that had gone quiet, not Donovan Pierce himself. The termination message was not even the real move he had made. There was something else, something personal, something that had nothing to do with restructuring. She wouldn't find out exactly what it was for another 6 weeks. And when she did, it changed the shape of everything that came next. She saved the document, closed the laptop, and went to bed. 3 months in, the silence settled into a pattern. She woke at 4 every morning, not with anxiety, with calculation. The specific alertness of a mind that has accepted a problem and refuses to stop working it even during sleep. Coffee before the apartment stirred. Laptop open. 2 hours of reading before the city woke up. She read SEC filings the way other people read fiction, looking for the places where the story a company told its investors didn't match what the numbers were actually doing beneath the surface. Acquisition disclosures, earnings transcripts, board announcements, investor letters. She built a private archive, folders and side folders, patterns emerging slowly. Then all at once, in month 2, she started writing. An anonymous blog. No name, no photo, no biography, just analysis, clean and precise breakdowns of corporate strategy moves in the current market, written in the specific way that only someone who had actually been inside these rooms could write them. She explained what public filings actually meant in practice. She named the distance between what companies said and what their structures were doing underneath. She wrote the first post to an audience of 0 and published it at 11 on a Tuesday night. By the following week, she had 40 readers. By the end of month 2, 400. This is the part that matters most. Because those 400 people were not random. They were analysts, junior associates, MBA students 2 and 3 years into finance careers who had been sitting in rooms watching senior executives make decisions that didn't add up and had never once seen anyone explain clearly and plainly why those decisions didn't add up. She was giving them the thing the industry never gives the people coming up through it. She was writing to them like they were intelligent enough to understand what was actually happening. Because they were. They came back every week. The comments section became something she had not expected. People sharing the specific experience of being in a room and watching their analysis get absorbed by a superior and walked upstairs without their name attached to it. Of being talked over by someone with less information and more confidence. Of watching a promotion go to the person who played the politics better rather than the person who did the work. She read every comment. She never responded publicly, but she understood that she was not just building an audience. She was building a community of people who recognized the same system and had been waiting for someone to simply name it out loud. By month, for the blog had 3,000 weekly readers. A financial newsletter with a significant following had linked to one of her posts. 2 collaboration requests had come through the contact form. She turned both down. She wasn't ready to be found yet. Then a woman named Nkechi Obi sent a message through the same contact form. Nkechi ran a boutique impact investment firm. Short client list, serious reputation. Her message was 4 sentences. The last one was a question. Have you ever considered building this into something? She stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed back, "Tell me what you mean by something." They met 3 days later at a coffee shop in the West Loop. Nkechi arrived 8 minutes early, ordered nothing, and placed a folded page on the table before they had finished their first exchange. A term sheet, seed funding, minority stake, clean terms, read in under a minute. Then she looked up. "You wrote this before we met," she said. After your 20-second post, Nkechi said, I've been waiting to see if you would stop. She didn't stop. The company was registered on a Tuesday in month 5, Ironwood Advisory. No announcement, no press release, no post. The name chosen deliberately, specific enough to be remembered, neutral enough to say nothing to anyone who didn't already know the story behind it. She told Theo that evening over dinner. He reached across and held her hand. Good, he said. He meant it. But the version of the future Theo had been quietly building in his mind. The one where she started something, stabilized, and eventually came back to a life that looked roughly like the one they had planned, was a different story than the one she was actually writing. She knew that. She let him hold his version for now. Ironwood's first client came through Nkechi's network, a logistics firm in Indianapolis weighing an acquisition that 2 advisory firms had given conflicting guidance on. 9 days inside their financials. A liability buried in the target company's lease structure. $11 million of exposure within 18 months of close. The deal was restructured. The $11 million was saved. Word moved. Slowly at first, then less quietly. By month 8, 3 active clients and a growing wait list. By month 10, a private equity group on the north side of Chicago mentioned Ironwood by name in a deal room where a Crestline associate happened to be present. He said nothing during the meeting. Afterward, he sent 2 lines to Donovan Pierce's chief of staff. The name Ironwood Advisory came up in a deal room today. The founder is Alex Fontaine. Donovan read the message on a Thursday afternoon. He did not send a lawyer this time. He picked up the phone and called a man named Gerald Holt, managing partner at one of 3 firms that had gone silent on her in the first week. The call lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, Gerald Holt had updated his internal notes on Alex Fontaine with what Donovan had told him, that she had been released following a compliance review, that performance concerns had been documented internally for over a year, that any firm considering her for a senior role should exercise appropriate caution. None of it was true. Every word of it was built to follow her indefinitely. She found out 6 weeks later, from a second-round interview that ended with an apologetic email carrying a reason that didn't quite fit the conversation she had just had. She called a contact. The contact made a call. 48 hours later, she had the shape of what Donovan had said, if not the exact words. She sat with it for a long time. This was a real move, not the termination notice, not the blacklist. A specific, deliberate lie told to exactly the right person in exactly the right language, designed to ensure that even if the industry eventually forgot to keep its distance from her, the file on her would not forget. She opened the second column of her document. She wrote it down. Then she kept building. A cease and desist letter arrived by courier in month 11. The return address belonged to a law firm that had represented Crestline for over 2 decades. The document cited a non-compete clause from her original employment agreement. Language precise and narrow in a way that was clearly not designed to protect a business. It was designed to generate a specific legal threat at a specific moment. She read it standing at her desk. Set it down. Called Priya. Priya was her attorney. She had the quality specific to lawyers who spent enough years in employment disputes to have permanently stopped softening their openings. The clause is real, Priya said. He drafted it to hold. Fighting it is possible. Fighting it is expensive and it takes time. And if Donovan's goal is to drain your runway while the case runs, he has done this before and he knows exactly how long the clock moves. How long before we respond? 14 days. All right. She ended the call. Looked out the window at the 14th floor. Not 51, not yet, but hers, and thought about the second column of her original document, what she could prove. She thought about the compliance filings she had watched get quietly amended after an internal audit raised concerns that were never made public. The acquisition disclosure structured to be technically accurate while telling investors something functionally different. The Cayman subsidiary that appeared in none of Crestline's public filings. She had held all of it in column 2 for nearly a year, waiting for a position stable enough to use what she was holding. She called Nkechi. Fighting the non-compete cost Ironwood $400,000 over 5 months. She paid it, not without consequence. The fees compress a runway, pause 2 client engagements, and push back every growth plan she had built for spring. But the fight made something happen that Donovan had not accounted for. It made Ironwood visible, not in the press. The case was not dramatic enough for coverage. But inside Chicago's mid-market finance community, the name Ironwood attached itself to a story that people in that world recognized immediately. A founder being legally pressured by a much larger firm, whose founder had a clear and personal motive. Several people in that world had received versions of that letter themselves. 3 of them reached out while the case was still running. One became Ironwood's largest client to that point. The case settled on narrow terms. Donovan's team framed it as a favorable outcome. Priya called the afternoon it closed. "You survived it," she said. "That was the minimum," Alex said. The man who almost ended everything was named Flynn Reyes. Mid-40s, 3 successful exits. The practiced ease of someone who had learned to enter rooms in a way that made other people feel the room had improved by his being in it. He positioned himself as a believer in founder-led firms with a specific interest in builders the traditional power structure had overlooked. He said all of this in a way that felt personal rather than rehearsed. He wired his investment in month 12, a meaningful check, enough to clear the remaining legal debt, fund the expansion, and give Ironwood the kind of financial stability that changes how a company carries itself in a room. She moved forward. New hire, larger office. A profile in a trade publication that called Ironwood emerging, the word used when a journalist doesn't yet have a category for what they are looking at. 6 weeks after the wire cleared, Nkechi called on a Sunday evening. Her voice had a quality it had never carried before. "I need you to hear something," she said. A contact at a law firm, someone who understood exactly what they were risking by sharing it, had told Nkechi about a call. Flynn had contacted Donovan Pierce's office 14 days after his investment cleared. 40 minutes. The subject. Flynn would deliver Ironwood's full client list and internal financial structure to Crestline in exchange for a board seat at one of Donovan's portfolio companies. She listened without interrupting. When Nkechi finished, the line was quiet. "Does he know you know?" she asked. "No, don't tell him." She ended the call. She sat alone in the Ironwood office for a long time after that. The city outside moved the way it always moved, continuous, indifferent, uninterested in the weight of any individual moment. She thought about Flynn's handshake, the way he had spoken about overlooked founders, how natural it had felt to trust someone who showed up using exactly the right language, about the fact that Donovan had not sent a lawyer this time. He had sent a person, someone calibrated precisely to the specific gap in her that needed filling. Then Theo called, checking in, which had become a phrase for a distance neither of them was naming directly. She told him she was still at the office. He said okay. For minutes. Silence after the line ended. She opened the original document, scrolled to column 3, what she intended to build. She deleted everything that was there and wrote something completely different. Donovan Pierce had made one fundamental error across all of it. He had spent 2 years treating her as a problem to be managed downward, fired, blacklisted, lied about, litigated, infiltrated, each move a containment play. Keep her reactive, keep her orbit small, keep her so consumed with defending what she had built that she never found the altitude to look down at what he was actually holding. He had never stopped to account for what she knew. 6 years inside Crestline, the amended filings, the misleading disclosures, the Cayman structure, and now in the second column alongside all of it, the lie he had told Gerald Holt, specific, dated, sourced, attached to a name and a phone call, and a documented outcome. She spent 3 weeks meeting privately with 2 securities attorneys and a forensic accountant. She told no one, not Nkechi, not Priya, not Theo. She moved the way you move when the only version of the plan that works is the one nobody sees until it's already finished. Conrad Ellis called on a Wednesday morning in early spring. He was 74 years old, 22 years on Crestline's board. He had voted against her termination. She would learn this only later. He had spent the months since in a posture of public neutrality that was, in private, something else entirely. He asked if she would meet him. Privately. Nothing connected to Crestline. Nothing that would appear on anyone's calendar. They met at a restaurant in Hyde Park. He arrived first, ordered water. waited. When she sat down, he slid a single folded page across the table without any preamble. 22 years on that board, he said quietly. I know exactly where the documents are. She unfolded the page. Handwritten, precise. 3 items appearing nowhere in Crestline's public disclosures. 2 she already had. 1 she did not. The one she didn't have changed the weight of everything else she was holding. She looked up at Conrad. He picked up his water glass. Donovan believes this chapter is closed, he said. She folded the page carefully and placed it in her jacket pocket. Then he hasn't been paying close enough attention, she said. She began acquiring Crestline stock in early summer. Quietly, across 3 separate holding vehicles structured to remain beneath the disclosure thresholds until she was ready to be visible. It took 8 months. It required the kind of patience that is not passive. It is active, daily, deliberate. The patience of someone who has decided that the only version of the outcome that matters is the complete one, and is willing to move at whatever pace that requires. Nkechi knew. Conrad knew. No one else did. During those 8 months, Ironwood ran its normal operations. New clients. New hires. A second office opened quietly on the north side. From the outside, it looked like a firm that had found its footing and was growing steadily. From the inside, it was a firm that was growing steadily, while simultaneously acquiring the company that had spent 2 years trying to bury it. Theo left in October. They had one long, honest conversation at the kitchen table, the same table where she had told him about the termination years before. And they said the true things to each other, and the true things were enough. He had loved her. She had loved him. The 2 futures they had been quietly building had been diverging for long enough that continuing to pretend otherwise had become its own kind of damage. He moved out on a Saturday. She helped carry boxes to the elevator. When she came back inside, the apartment was very quiet. She sat at the kitchen table for a while. Then she opened her laptop and went back to work. The acquisition bid went public on a Tuesday morning in February. Her legal team filed the formal tender offer at 7:15. By 7:40, Crestline stock had moved. By 8:32, major financial platforms were running the story. By 9, Donovan Pierce had called an emergency board session the following morning. The headline was consistent across every outlet that picked it up. A firm called Ironwood Capital, recently restructured from its advisory origins, had acquired controlling interest in Crestline Capital and was seeking full board approval for acquisition. The founder of Ironwood Capital was a 33-year-old black woman who had previously spent 6 years at Crestline before being terminated. Donovan worked the phones all afternoon. Some board calls were long. Several were very short. By evening, he had learned that 3 board members had already received calls from her legal team. Not threats, not ultimatums, just information. Documented information, the kind that once shared permanently changes the nature of every conversation that follows. Conrad Ellis did not pick up. The board meeting convened at 9 the following morning. Floor 51. The room with the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. The room she had walked into for 6 years as someone else's asset, as the person behind the person at the head of the table, the one whose work traveled upstairs under a different name. Donovan was already at the window when she arrived, his back to the room. When he heard her heels on the marble, he turned slowly. He looked older than she had expected. Not broken, just older. The specific way powerful men age when the structure that made them feel large is no longer entirely under their control. You don't have to do this, he said. Quiet, not a threat, almost a request. I know, she said. She walked to her seat. The board chair opened the meeting. The acquisition documents were presented. Each member received the floor in turn. Conrad Ellis spoke last, briefly, plainly, in the flat, factual tone of a man who had made his decision long before anyone called the meeting. The vote was taken. It carried. Donovan stood slowly. He buttoned his jacket from the bottom button up, methodically, the same way he had done it in every board meeting for 40 years, and picked up the leather portfolio he had carried into this room longer than some of the board members had been in the industry. He looked at her once. A long look, the kind that carries everything a person is unwilling to say out loud. Then he walked to the door, even, unhurried, each step the same as the last across the marble floor. He pressed the elevator call button himself. The doors opened. He stepped inside. 51, 40, 26, 12. Lobby. The doors closed. She didn't celebrate that evening. She went back to the Ironwood office on the 14th floor, the one that had started as a folding table and a notebook and a lamp and 4 o'clock mornings and an audience of 0. And she sat at her desk for a long time without doing anything in particular. She thought about the document with 3 columns, about the bridal suite at the Palmer House in Gardenias, and an R&B playlist drifting from a bathroom counter, and a dress hanging from a wardrobe door like the period at the end of a very long sentence, about a phone face down on a vanity, and a woman finishing her lipstick in a mirror, choosing in that moment to carry the weight alone rather than let it change the shape of the day. She thought about Theo carrying boxes to the elevator and the way he had looked at her before the doors closed, not with anger, not with blame, but with the quiet expression of someone who had watched something happen to a person they loved and had understood, long before either of them said it out loud, that he was not built for the specific cause of standing beside it. She thought about an anonymous blog and 40 readers and 403,000 and the comments from people who had been sitting in the same kinds of rooms, watching the same machinery run, waiting for someone to simply call it by its right name. She thought about Nkechi sending 4 sentences through a contact form to a blog with no name on it. She thought about Conrad Ellis ordering water and waiting in a restaurant in Hyde Park with 22 years of patience folded neatly in his jacket pocket. She thought about all the 4 o'clock mornings. She gave no interviews about the acquisition. 1 press release, 4 sentences, prepared by her team, stating the completion of the transaction and the new leadership structure at Crestline. No photographs, no posts, no dinner. The work continued. The Crestline portfolio was assessed, restructured, and redirected with the same precision she had spent 6 years applying on its behalf, but this time with her name on every decision. She brought back 4 former Crestline employees in the first month. 3 of them had been quietly pushed out during the years Donovan was running his campaign against her. None of them knew, until their first week back, who had specifically asked them by name. Flynn Reyes never reached out. She had expected he might. He didn't. Gerald Holt sent a brief professional email 8 months after the acquisition closed. Careful, oblique, the kind of message a person sends when they are acknowledging something without being willing to say it plainly. She read it, understood exactly what it was, and archived it without responding. Donovan Pierce sent 1 message. 11 months after the close. She read it on a Tuesday afternoon at the same desk where she had once read the cease and desist and the termination letter before that, and the call from the colleague who had phoned from a number she didn't recognize to tell her to stay low and let people forget. She read it once. Then she archived it. She had spent 6 years giving that company everything she had. She had spent 5 more building something he could not dismantle no matter which direction he came at it from. She did not owe Donovan Pierce a single word more than she had already spent in that boardroom on floor 51. She closed the laptop, called Nkechi, asked if she wanted to get dinner. Outside on Wacker Drive, Chicago moved the way it always moves. Fast, indifferent, completely uninterested in any individual story no matter how long it took to finish telling. If this story hit the way we intended, subscribe to Echotales by Ken right now. Every week we bring you stories about power, patience, and people who refuse to stay down. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. And on the 14th floor of a building that now had her name on the lease, Alex Fontaine sat back in her chair and felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Not triumph, not relief, just the clean, quiet satisfaction of a person who finished exactly what they started. Some debts don't need words. They only need time.